There we go.
Perfect. They're coming in slowly. We'll give people just another minute or so to come in, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah.
Alrighty, so as you're coming in, I just want to let you all know that your video and your sound will be disabled throughout this session. If you do have any questions, please put them in the chat box. The chat box will be located on the website, the CTE website, where you went to join this meeting. I'll monitor the chat throughout the session and let Mr. Greene know if he has any questions come through. This session is increasing student engagement through project-based learning with Brent Greene. So if you're not at the right one, I just wanted to let you know that's what we're here for today. And with that, I think, Mr. Greene, we are ready to get started.
All right, thank you very much. As she said, my name is Brent Greene, and I don't have anything earth-shattering here, but I did just want to reach out to people and let them know some of the ways that have worked for me throughout the years to get people from outside the classroom engaged, and how to get the students in the class to jump on board and really run with a project, because I've seen great success with that throughout the years. So hopefully you learned something, and again, any questions throughout, please ask and I'll try to answer them as I go along. All right, so who am I? Well, I'm Brent. I teach coding, I teach autonomous vehicles, I teach basically every single computer science course that we offer here where I am at Franklin High. But you'll notice the autonomous vehicles, you don't see that listed anywhere. And this just came out of a project that I started doing several years ago, and it just turned into an entire class. And I'll talk more about that as we go along. But it was a massive project, and when it says autonomous vehicles, these students are programming autonomous vehicles to drive. So, but this is my second career. My first career was, I actually worked in the IT field, started out designing networks for buildings that didn't exist yet, and just grew from there until I got very, very bored and retired. And so now I discovered that I actually love being in the classroom working with students. So here I am. All right, so why a project-based classroom? What is the point of having one? Well, the first big one is the student engagement. I learned that when you have a project, the students are going to be more engaged than rather than just giving a day-to-day lesson or a weekly lesson, write this code, or do this little assignment and let's see if everybody gets the same thing at the end. Project-based seems to work a lot better at getting students involved because it's something different for most of them. And with that, they take ownership. Like, oh, this is my project, I can make it my way. And they know that it's all on them and they can design it the way they want to. So the students they really do take ownership of it, and they're like, I want to make this my own. I want to make this great. And with that being said, what I do is I give out a project, I give out the idea. This is what I'm looking for, or this is what the client is looking for. You know, what can you do with it? And then that's it. I leave it open-ended. What can you do with it? Can you give me a solution to this problem? And they have to solve it. I don't tell them how to solve it. I give them tools. I give them little mini lessons. This is how you do this. This is how you do that. But I never give them a single piece of code. I never give them a single straight answer of do it this way, because I want them to learn to solve it, because that leads it back to they take ownership of it, and they have to stay engaged because they know there's not going to be anybody there that's going to give them the answer. And that drives their entire solution path. Because when I give a project, their project goes from beginning to end. I give them the problem, what the client wants, but I'll get to that in a minute, what I mean by client, but they have to take that problem and they have to design the solution from beginning to end. What is the path? How are they going to arrange it? How are they going to arrive at it? And how are they going to test it? And is it going to work at the end? And the students love this. They complain about it, but they love it. And I have never seen a student in my class that didn't take some part of it and just run with it. And they have to document everything they do. So what about the students? Well, these are a couple of my students, and we'll show you some pictures of some of the students as they were working on it. Now, in this particular class, this is one of the autonomous vehicles classes because I teach about 2 to 4 of them every year. And these are a couple. These were not the programmers. These, when I gave out this project, the students built their own teams, and then they broke their teams into smaller teams to handle different aspects of the project. These two were on the design team for the car itself. They had to come up with how to build it, how to assemble it, what parts they needed, and where they were going to put them, how they were going to connect them, and they had to deal with the programmer of this is the path, now this is how you have to write it. This gentleman right here on the bottom, he was one of the lead programmers on it. And he had to know not only all the languages and everything else that goes into programming that, which he had to go and study on his own outside of class so he would be prepared when he was working with his team, but he also had to stay in constant communication with the build team of where are you in the build, what part can I program now, what part can I test. Now this is me addressing one entire team, one part of an entire team of what they were doing, what were they coming up with, and some of them were telling me their problems, and if you'll notice, I'm kind of smiling because I'm not going to give them an answer. And this is just a mock-up of what they would build. If you look up there in the top left, you'll see that that's sort of what they came up with, but this is just a mock-up of, this is kind of what the client is looking for. And then this team right here, this is the team that I currently have going. They came up with their own project. They have graduated, but they came up with their own project of their lasting legacy of they have started making 3D face shields for local hospitals and first responders as they need them. And like I said, they have graduated, but they still do their own projects, and they've left this project for the incoming students to continue. And that's what I mean when it is a student show, because once the students learn how to do a project, they get engaged in that project, that's what they want to do. And they will lay out every part of it, every single aspect. They will go to problems. They will even go out and meet with people they need to meet with, if they need resources. They will take ownership of all of that. And it is amazing. Now, who is involved? Who has to be involved in this? Who has to take ownership of it? Who has to do it? Well, the first thing are the students. You have to get the students involved. This doesn't happen overnight. I've been doing this for years, and one of the first things I learned to do is you have to grab those students from day one. And that means you have to get to know them. What do they like? What don't they like? How do they learn? What are they interested in? All of that. And you have to grab the students first. Then once you get the students will start talking about it, what they're doing in class, what they like, what they don't like. And then the parents start coming. Typically, most of the parents I've met with, their parents are like, my kid won't shut up about your class. My kid comes home with work every day from your class, but they won't shut up about it, and they're not complaining. What are you doing? Because they're complaining about this class, or I can't get them to do this. I can't get them to do anything at home, but they're always working on stuff for you, and they will not stop talking about it. And the parents will come in and start looking at, well, what's going on in the classroom? What are they working on? What are they doing? And then the parents want to become involved. They want to come in, they want to volunteer, they want to give resources, they want to do every little aspect that they can in the classroom. And that is invaluable. If you get the students and then you get the parents, your projects will grow.
Mr. Greene, we have a few questions coming in. I just wanted to get those to you real quick.
Okay.
The first one was, what is a 3D face shield?
3D face shield, I don't know if anybody's seen them, but they're 3D printed. And if you've seen those safety, you've got the mask that everybody's wearing now, but it's also just a face shield. It's just got like a clear plastic front with a headband on it that most hospitals and first responders will wear. So it takes care of splashback and things like that.
Okay, and the next question was, how would you do project-based if students are virtual learning at home, especially if they need materials to build a project?
All right, I was wondering if that question was going to come up. All right, so what I have come up with on dealing with that, because I have, this is going to be the first year that schools are most likely going to all be remote-based, but I've had students that have taken my class but still had to be at home, is when you get the materials and you get the project of what it is going to be, you stay in constant communication with that student. And then you can either through the school, through a courier, or yourself or someone at the school can take the materials that that student might need to do that project and deliver it to them. And then that student can try to do that project on their own, or they can be a member of another team and they'll be handed off. They'll take components of that project from the team and they'll be doing it home and then either sending it in or emailing it, whatever the project may be. But you would have to set up somebody from the school or yourself to take those components back and forth from that student.
Okay, and one more for now. What about the quality of virtual labs with software such as the Test Out and others? Are they effective?
They're effective for theory knowledge, in my opinion, and some basic knowledge, but to really get, in my opinion, this is just my humble opinion, to really get where the students really learn how to function in the real world doing this, they really need real problems. And that's where I try to pull problems from the real world that are in the headlines or things that are going on that are hot right now, or businesses and companies will approach me, hey, we've got this going on. Can your students tackle part of this? Or can they tackle all of that? The students get more learning out of doing that than they do out of testing software of, okay, write this line of code, or can you write this little script to handle this? It's great for getting the theory and the basic of the languages, but it doesn't really apply in the real world.
Okay, great. That was all for now.
All right, thank you. Now talking about that with businesses and the projects, the businesses, sometimes they'll come to you, especially if they've heard from parents that work in those companies of this is what's going on in my student's class, you need to take a look at that. Or that if you get any press, the businesses will come to you, but a lot of times you have to find businesses that you want to partner with or that could handle an aspect of what you're teaching, and go out and talk to them. Give them a call, email them something. You do have to reach out to businesses because you're eventually going to run dry on thoughts, or your projects are going to start being rehashed, and students talk, and you don't want to do that because then it's not fresh to them. They've already seen, oh, here's a solution, I'm going to grab it. So you go out to the businesses, and the businesses can always give you a new problem, something they're working on, something their team might be trying to solve, and so they can hand it off to students as well and say, okay, let's see what the next generation would come up with. But it is important that you get all three of those, students, parents, and businesses, because if you get all three, your projects are going to be awesome. I love that word, awesome. Now, how do you do that? How do you just reach out, cold call, cold email businesses? Well, like I said, you just ask. Most businesses are willing to talk, because a lot of teachers won't reach out to them. And these businesses are going to be hiring these students. So the sooner they can see those students, sooner they see what those students are capable of doing and what they're interested in, and they can get them early, they can start pulling them in slowly. Hey, come look at my company. You know, you really want to work here. This is what we got to offer. And they can start looking at them early, and the kids will love that because they know that they've got a better shot at a job. But you do have to ask. And that is calling them, setting up a meeting, maybe not right now, but setting up some kind of virtual meeting with them. But you have to talk to them. They have to know that you are out there. They have to know the students are out there, and they have to know somebody's out there willing to, hey, we want to partner with you. We want you to partner with us. This is what we have. This is what my students have to offer. This is what they're capable of doing. You will be amazed. Come take a look. Let's work together. But you do have to step outside the classroom. It cannot be, oh, you know, just be in my classroom. This is what we're doing. Come take a look. Da, da, da. You have to meet with them. And tell them what your students are doing. Not tell them who your students are, but tell them what your students are doing. What are they working on? What are you doing right now? What are they doing right now? How are they doing it? You know, if nothing else, if you can get them to come into your classroom, which more are willing than you would think, show them what the students are doing. Have the students show them, this is what I'm working on right now. This is my problem. This is how I'm attacking it. This is what I see as a solution. This is how I'm going to do my solution. Show them. Nothing impresses people that want to partner with you on projects more than seeing what the students are doing right now. They love that. That'll get them interested. That'll get them to want to do something with your students, want to do something in your class. If you do that, they will stay. They will give you resources if you ask. They will be there. I've even had some companies, when they partner, they've sent people from their own departments in that company to come work with my students for an entire day or an entire week, just show up in class and just work with them. Show them what it's like in the real world, show them the tools in the real world, and work with them as if they were working in that business. These companies want to work in the classrooms. They want to work with the students. It's just we as teachers for so long have been islands into ourselves of not wanting people to come in. And sometimes the businesses don't want to come in once they've come in, because if they just see a standard curriculum of, oh, here's the book we're using, we're on lesson 23 right now, they're not impressed by that. They're not going to be interested. But if you say, okay, this is the problem we're working on, this is a project that they're doing, they'll want to do that because that's closer to what they have to do in the real world. And then they'll be there and they will stay. Because folks, it's all about connections. The connections you have with them, the connections the students have with them, the connections they have with the students, with your class. Make that connection. They will always be there for you.
Mr. Greene, they added in and maybe try your Chamber of Commerce and Rotary groups to swing by for a tour as well. And
Absolutely.
we had a question. What about job shadowing or internships? Have you tried that? And was it something businesses were willing to do?
I have tried that, and I've had some businesses interested in doing it. The only issue I have right now is businesses are trying to find a place where they can put the students. And they're having to look at the students and say, okay, yeah, I could use them, but they're still a little hesitant. And I'm working on that right now. My department is working on that. The people that are above me, that work closely with me, are really hammering that out with businesses of how they can take high schoolers and put them in there and deal with information and not have to have them give sensitive information, because that's what most businesses are afraid of, is the students messing with sensitive information or information they don't need to see. But for the most part, the companies are looking at that, especially in the last couple of years, because they're starting to see that students have all the skills that a lot of these kids coming out of college don't even have yet. And so they are really interested in that, and they will put them in internships. And some of them that I've seen, that some of my students have gone out and talked to, taking their projects, and they've been offered part-time or full-time jobs while still going to school to work remotely or come in and work on weekends or evenings or in between classes. So they are out there and they are very much willing to do that if you can work with them and say, okay, well, my students can do this. They don't have to be in this department. If they're open, if you are open, if the students are open, the businesses will meet you.
Excellent. We've had a few people ask if age has been a factor in not letting students, participate in things like that. And there's been some responses of, some 18-year-olds in most cases, or safety and liability being a big issue with the age of a student. So
that has been some. They don't want to, they're very hesitant to work with, your freshman age and things like that, 14, 15, and in a lot of cases, 16-year-olds. But they do start seriously looking at least in my case, they do start seriously looking at students when they're about 17, or they'll really start looking at them because like I said, they want to grab them as soon as they can, because they know if they can get them interested in their company and get them in there early, then they'll at least have that person for at least 3 to 5 years and usually longer. And so they are seriously looking at 17 and 18-year-olds now. And I predict in the coming years that they'll start looking at 16-year-olds, especially if they have developed these skills through projects.
great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know you said, some people said, look at your local chamber and things like that. If you look down here at the bottom, I've got Williamson Inc. That is my local chamber, and they have been wonderful for me. And so I will second that and third that and all of that reaching out to your local chambers, because the chamber is invaluable. They know the businesses. They can make those connections. They know who to call a lot faster than you'll find it. They already know. And if you can get the chamber to come into your room first and take a look, it's like my chamber has been to my room. I've quit counting. And every time that they have come, they've brought 2, 3, 4 people from area businesses or global corporations to just come in with them to take a look. And so they are invaluable. And my school board has been invaluable. I've had school board members come in and they know people, or they actually work for businesses as well that want to partner. And so I definitely say reach out to your school board. And then these first 3 are just companies that I just picked at random that have been inside my room to take a look and to work with the students. And this 4-8 consulting, they have actually agreed for the last couple of years to come in once a month or once every 2 months and teach my class about marketing themselves and presenting their products and presenting their projects. And they have been willing to come in and work with them for the last 2 years. Bridgestone partnered with me on one of the builds to design a Bridgestone tire for one of the cars that the students were building. They took the tire that they had and redesigned one to fit on my 1/10 scale cars of the kids. So that was really awesome. And then Nissan, well, naturally we're designing, self-driving cars. They were very interested, but it doesn't, just look around who's near you, anything like that, any company that your students could benefit from or your class could benefit from, reach out to them. But definitely don't forget your school board and your chamber, because they will be invaluable to you. Now, what is the #1 key to success? This I learned slower than I wanted to, because as I was trained as a teacher when I left my first career and came into that, I was trained to, you've got to teach, you've got to work with the students, you've got to set the model and everything else. But it took me a little while to learn this, but the #1 key to success with projects is you got to let the students do all the work. Now, with that being said, naturally they've got to do all the programming, they've got to do all the designing and everything else. But the biggest thing is when those visitors come in, and they will come in if you reach out to them, when they come in, you take a back seat. You don't take the lead on talking to the visitors. You don't take the lead talking to the people coming in to see what the students are doing. The students have to do all the work. They have to do all the talking, all the presenting, everything. Now, why? My biggest thing is the people coming are not coming to see me. You know, I'm not the one going out there. I'm not going to be the one that's going to be employed. So they don't need to talk to me. They need to talk to the students, because the students are the ones that are going to be taking the jobs. They're going to be the ones that are hired. So they need to talk to them to see what they're doing. On the flip side of that, I've always thought the students, you know, since they're taking ownership, it's their project, it's not mine. I'm not keeping up with every little detail of their project day in, day out. I just look at their documentation and snapshots. They know what's going on in their project, so they need to talk about it. That also builds that skill of verbally articulating, this is what I'm doing, this is the problem as I saw it, this is my plan of attack for it. They need to get used to talking to people about that, explaining that, and you'll get those students that always talk in very highly technical terms. They need to learn how to back that down to a common language anybody can understand. And they need to be able to put their presentations together. And so I force them, I tell them from the beginning that anybody that ever comes in that room, I'm not talking, you all are. And that scares them at first, but they develop that, and then I have had kids come out of my program and they are excelling in the business world. They said, mainly because I forced them to talk to people when they didn't want to. And we've all had to do that. And I do have something that I close out every year of my classes with, is that I will have a panel come in on professionals. That could be teachers, administrators. I have business people come in from high level to, you know, just people that are just doing the grunt work. I have them all come in and they sit on a panel, and each of my students in their teams present their final project from beginning to end. And they have to do a presentation, and they know their grade on that final comes from that panel. And that's just to drive home that other point, that to be successful, you have to do the work.
All right, Mr. Greene, we had a couple things come through on the chat here.
Yeah.
Matthew Spinella wanted to let everyone know that in Tennessee, 16 and 17-year-old students that are involved in work-based learning courses, when they have all of the proper documentation signed, they'll be exempt from the Child Labor Act.
Thank you. Thank you.
Definitely. And then we have another question asking if you guys are on a block schedule, and how does that look?
No, we're not on a block schedule. We are on a 7-period day. So I get these students roughly, you know, because I'm in a separate building on the other side of my campus. So the kids all have to walk from the main building to me. So I usually get a good 40 minutes a day with them on these projects. So they work like crazy when they're in here, and I'm not a slave driver. They'll tell you I'm definitely not a slave driver, but they work for 40 minutes a day in here. And then a lot of times they'll take it home, and I get emails and things from my students at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. And then that's when I become a slave driver and tell them to go to sleep. But like I said, they take ownership of this, and they are working on it from start to finish once they get into my classroom. And they don't stop, because they find something in that project. The students will always find something in the project you give them that they are passionate about, and then they will work on that from beginning to end. You will see a major change in what your students do.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, like I said, it's nothing earth-shattering, but that's what I have found that works in my classroom, and it has worked for several years. And it's really just all about the students. Now, what does it require on the teacher side? This is the hard part, and this is where I've always gotten some pushback from teachers, is that you have to let go of your classroom. You have to let go of the knowledge that you're not going to know everything that's going on. You're not going to know all the answers, and you're not going to have a plan that says, okay, I know at this point, this is what they're going to be doing, because you will not know, because every kid in that room thinks differently than you. You may have more experience, you may not, but they all think differently than you will. And so they're going to attack it from a different aspect, a different view. They may see something you never even thought of. And you're going to have to be willing to let them explore that, and not be afraid that they're going to go down some path you didn't think of. And chances are the first project, first two, first three, first five projects you do may not come out successful in the way you had the belief that it would be successful, but it will be successful regardless, because you will have those students working on something and they will be infinitely more interested in that than in the, all right, class, today, everybody sit down, we're going to write code that does this. They will love the project a whole lot more than the day-to-day lessons. But the biggest pushback I've got is you have to let go of the classroom and it seems like you just let the students take over. And they'll take over, but they will do things you never dreamed of.
All right, Mr. Greene, a few more questions here.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys give extra credit for those that complete internships?
We have a class here where they can sign up to, and I think every high school does, where they can sign up for the internships. I have never given extra credit, and my extra credit policy is, if you're doing what you need to be doing in class, you don't need extra credit. But I have placed students in jobs, or I've had businesses reach out and I've pointed students to companies. And what I have found is I haven't had to give extra credit for that, is because the students take what they learn in here and they reinforce it in the company they're working for. And the company rewards them typically by every student I've placed in the last 2 years has gotten a raise within the first 3 to 5 weeks of being in their company.
Excellent. And how is grading done with your project-based learning, or is that secondary to just learning?
Grades to me are very subjective. I have to give them, or otherwise I would never give a grade. So how I grade it is, one, I grade it, okay, what was the problem? Did you come up with a solution? All right, and did you outline what your solution should do as opposed to that problem? And I give them this rubric. And then I look at what their project was, whether it was code or something else. Did it solve the problem? Did it do what the client asked for? And they get that listed out too. What are the client's requirements? And then if they've done that, then they've passed it usually with an A. And then I go back and look, okay, how did you implement that solution? Did you explain it in your write-up, in your documentation? And then I grade their documentation, and they get a separate grade for the documentation based on how detailed is it? Did you hit all the points of the rubric? Does it explain it? And then I go back and sometimes I give a third grade of, all right, is it easy for the person that you're writing this for? Would they understand it? Would the user understand it? Would the person on the back end understand it? That's how I grade it. But first and foremost, my class is about learning and doing, not whether did you hit all these points. It's more about, can you do it? Did you learn something?
All right, we have two more. You mentioned earlier about 3D printers. Do you have a preferred brand? The one we have at school keeps breaking, and so they're having a hard time getting the administration to allow them to get another one.
All right, that's a great question, because my 3D printer was a student project that, I wanted a 3D printer, and I got a business to donate one to me about 3 years ago. And it was a knockoff brand, and it didn't work from day one. And so the students worked on that students over multiple years worked on that printer trying to get it to work, and it would never work. And they even reprogrammed the thing, and it still wouldn't work because it was bad components. And so last year I started looking, and I asked students, because I'm not a 3D printer expert, so I asked my students, and I had several who are, basically are 3D printer experts, what they would get, and it came up with one called a Modix. Now, they are expensive. They are industrial grade 3D printers, but I've got a huge one sitting over here, a 2x2 3D printer sitting over here in the corner of my room. And it has been a student project from beginning to end. The only thing I did was I placed the order, and I have a wonderful parent organization that bought it for me. It was incredibly expensive. So when you look those up, you'll see what I'm talking about. But it has been wonderful in the fact that the students, again, they made it their own project, a side project from what they were doing in class. They took this on as well. They assembled the thing, and it came with roughly 12,000 parts to put together, because it literally came in nuts and bolts, and that was it. And then they have programmed it, and they have programmed everything that they've printed off of it since. But the only thing I know about is I know that a lot of my students don't like MakerBots. And they said this one, it's called a Modix, M-O-D-I-X. They seem to really like that one a lot, and I have no complaints about it so far. So I would look in that and then look at ones that are comparable to that if your budget doesn't allow for something of that expense.
Okay, thank you. Are you okay with two more?
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. Do you have suggestions for success since we will most likely be virtual and can't have visitors in our classrooms or labs?
My first thing would be, some of you will probably have returning students and all of you will probably have new students. The first thing I would do, I would not jump in with a project. The first thing I would do would jump in building that relationship with the students. Do little things, whether it be little games or just posing little problems out there and see who can get an answer back to you. And then, do little competitions. Who can get me a solution to this the fastest? A correct solution to this the fastest. And I would start building that camaraderie and open it up to let students ask you questions or pose problems to you. Students always love that. My students always love posing problems to me, and they get a kick out of it when I can't solve it. And so I would start building that camaraderie first, getting to know them, because projects, they do have to buy into you as the teacher as well, to know that it is safe for them to attempt this project and for them to know that it's safe if they don't do it right. And the only way you can make a student feel safe is if they feel like they know you and they feel like that it's okay if they do things their way. So my advice would be to start building that relationship first. And that can take, a few weeks to a month or so. And you can still get your grading and stuff in there with little bitty problems and mini projects of like, okay, I need this. You've got 2 days to write it and get me something successful in 2 days. And then you build up to the bigger projects from that. But I would start there and then start handing out the big projects. And how you do that will be dependent. You'll know your classroom dynamic better than anybody. Okay, do you want to hand out the whole project, or do you want to hand it out in pieces, do this first and do this first, and then have them assemble it all at the end? You'll know your dynamic of your students better than anybody of whether they can handle the whole thing or if they need it in pieces.
And this question kind of goes along with that. When students are in groups, do you have them create a student contract so that all students will be accountable and have guidelines in place for their self-governing team?
Yeah, when in their teams, they have to draw up all of their norms, what they're going to do, who's going to be in charge of what, who's on what team, because they have a big project team. And then they seem to always, without my guidance, they seem to always break it down into individual development teams. But they lay out all of that in their documentation, who's responsible for what, who's taking this, who's on this team, who's on that team. They've even come up with floaters that move back and forth. But the students handle all of that, and I require that because that makes them accountable, and that also allows them, because the team leads have to send me updates at least once a week. They send me an email or whatever, or they have a separate documentation separate from the team that only I see, only they and I see, and they will give me write-ups of what's going well, what's not going well. These are issues or problems that we're having, and I give them feedback, or if they need guidance on how to handle a conflict within the team, I'll give them things like that. But they have to know who's responsible for what, because in the real world, you're responsible for your part. So I run my classroom as if it's a real world.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, that's pretty much it on my end. I know you've been asking questions throughout, and that's wonderful. I love questions. I would rather answer questions and come up with what to tell you all. So if anybody has any other questions, feel free, ask them now. I will try to answer them. And if I don't have an answer, I'm sure somebody else watching will. And so they might be able to answer. But does anybody have any questions about any of this at all? Any last minute questions or anything like that? I know it's not the last minute, but does anybody have any?
We have a few people asking if there's any way they can get copies of all the rubrics used for grading and evaluating.
I can try. I don't have it on this computer, but I can try to get those, and then I can figure out where to put them that everybody would have access to it, in the coming days.
That would be great. And I believe you can attach files just to this session as well in your file section. So we should be able to get those out to
Right,
them.
and they'll be able to access that in the coming days as well?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I will do that.
And I'm not seeing any additional questions so far.
Okay. Well, I would like to reiterate that, just from the teacher side, I am a trained mathematician, IT person, and scientist by degrees, but I have found being projects for me, I find it with projects, I am way more interested in coming into the classroom every day because I have no idea what's going to happen. I have no idea what the students are going to do or where they're going to take what we're working on. And I learn just as much, if not more, from the students than they learn from me, because I have learned to think, just watching through their eyes, I've learned to think of problems in different ways and see things I've never even thought of. And so it is a learning experience for me every day. And I know it would be that way for everybody else.
All right. Another question has come through. What will you use for group projects if we are virtual instead of face-to-face? Teams or Zoom or a different platform?
Mostly I will be using Zoom because that's what the district has pushed right now, but I'm also using something called Schoology to post and do chats and things like that. But I also have Google Classroom, and my students have set up their own chats as well. And they do every year, they set up their own communication, formats within their teams. And I'm okay with all of that because, to be in my classroom, you have to be responsible. And I make sure that going in the first few weeks, who's responsible, who's not. And I take care of all that at the beginning. But I use, as long as it's district approved, and I ask because I know who to bug to ask in my district, as long as it's district approved, I use whatever the students want to that's going to best facilitate what they need. But my big ones from the district are, Zoom, Schoology, and Google Classroom right now. And I know we have Google Teams on there because the student, set up a Google team meeting last year.
All right, thank you. If anyone has any additional questions, you can put them in the chat box of the main CTE website where you went to join this meeting. As we wait on more questions, we do have a few more minutes. The keyword for your survey is gold. So if you haven't written that down, go ahead and write that down and make sure to take your survey at the end of the session as well.
All right. Well, I always ask, when I meet with people, whether it be this way or that on projects, please, if you can find a way, any projects you come up with or things that you do in your classroom, I'd love to see that because I love to see what other people are doing. And sometimes I steal your ideas. I'll be honest. Sometimes if I see a good idea that I like, I'll steal it and use it. That's just the nature of being a teacher. But I also like to know what everybody else is doing, just because I will even show students at times, okay, this is going on over here. This is a project they're doing, just so they can see that they're not the only ones that are doing projects in the classroom. They can see that this is happening more and more all over the place. So, you have any ideas about projects, or, you have an idea about a project, hey, I don't know if this would work. I would love to hear about it and give you any feedback or anything that I could.
Do you have any ideas of projects that don't actually have physical objects? This person works in a prison, and so it's difficult sometimes to get items in.
Okay. Well, I don't know about the access, but some of the projects I have done in the past, it doesn't need physical components. It just needs code. Is, for people, of basic skills or a little above basic skills, web scraping is always a good thing. I had a student, I've had students at differing levels write, music apps that tied into Spotify, things like that. I've also had them, I've had students to create their own personal data assistant to keep track of, assignments, meetings, things like that they can just pull up on any device or any computer that are just automatically run and keep track of things like that. And I've had some of them just create little mini games as educational games. I had one create a game just through coding and things like that. They created something to monitor, food intake for health-wise of fats and things like that. So any project like that, that just where there's coding involved and you don't need anything else, those go over very well too, because there's a wealth of examples out there that students can pull and people can pull and look at, and then they can write their own as well. So anything like that that they don't have to build, that is code, just basically code intensive, always works.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have one more question. I believe we have time for one more. If your system is going to offer at least partial distance learning for students, how will you provide instruction to students not in the classroom? Will you use YouTube or a different platform?
I will post some to YouTube, and I will record, if I have students that are going to be out, and I know I'm going to have some, they've already told me, that I'm going to record the lessons as I go through, especially when I do any type of lecture, which I do as little as possible. I'll record those and I will post them, to my Schoology site, to my Google Classroom site as well. And then if I feel like it, I'll also post it to YouTube. And then they will be assigned to a team, and then they will be given time during class or to talk to me or talk to that, to that team virtually or outside. And I'll run it as, as if they were a work from home employee, because it's going to be real world. So, okay, so you're working from home, but here's your work that you're going to be assigned to do. Because again, I run my classroom just like it's a business in the real world.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I think that's all the questions we had come in. Again, the keyword for today, for this session, is gold. So that was all I had.
All right, well, thank you all very much for attending, and I will get those rubrics posted as soon as I can.
Great, thank you, Mr. Greene.
Thank you.